off today's list, we have the Bermuda Triangle, also referred to as the Devil's Triangle. It's an area between the coasts of Miami, Puerto Rico, and, you guessed it, Bermuda, that's been home to way too many disappearances by boat and by plane to be normal by my personal definition of the term. Historically speaking, the first notable disappearance was the HMS Atalanta in 1840, who disappeared with her entire crew after setting sail from the Royal Naval Dockyard, Bermuda, for Falmouth, England on January 31st. While it's presumed a storm was the reason for her fate, and the search for evidence attracted worldwide attention, nothing was ever found. If you'd prefer to talk about flights, on December 28th of 1948, a Douglas DC-3 aircraft disappeared while on a flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami. No trace of the aircraft or the, 32 people on board was ever found. More recently, in late July of 2015, two 14-year-old boys, Austin Stephanos and Perry Cohen, went on a fishing trip in their 19-foot boat. Despite the, 15,000 square nautical mile wide search by the Coast Guard, the pair's boat was found a year later off the coast of Bermuda, but the boys were never seen again. And there's plenty more stories where these came from, which is why I can't write off the Bermuda Triangle as a simple coincidence area. Trust me, I'd be here all day if we went through all of them. In ninth place, we have Stonehenge. Anyone want to guess what this might be if you don't already know? Yep, a big pile of rocks. How'd you guess? So Stonehenge is a prehistoric monument located on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England. It consists of an outer ring of vertical standing stones, each around 13 feet high, 7 feet wide, and weighing around 25 tons, topped by connecting horizontal stones. Inside is a ring of smaller blue stones, and past those are freestanding trilithons, which are two bulkier vertical stones joined by a connecting horizontal stone. Archaeologists believe that Stonehenge was constructed around 3000 BC to 2000 BC. And now that I've gotten the factual mumbo-jumbo out of the way, here's the fun mystery. Stonehenge was produced by a culture that left no written records. Most aspects, such as how it was built and for what purposes it was used, remain subject to debate and many myths. There is little or no direct evidence revealing the construction techniques used by the builders. Over the years, various researchers have suggested that supernatural or anachronistic methods were used, usually asserting that the stones were impossible to move otherwise due to their massive size. In 8th place, we have the Great Library of Alexandria. Located in Egypt, it was one of the largest and most significant libraries of the ancient world. The library acquired many papyrus scrolls, owing largely to the Ptolemaic king's aggressive and well-funded policies for procuring texts. It is unknown exactly just how many scrolls were housed at any given time, but estimates range from 40 to 400,000 at its height. Alexandria came to be regarded as the capital of knowledge and learning, in part because of the Great Library. Many important and influential scholars worked at the library during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, including Callimachus, who wrote the Pentateuch, considered to be the world's first library catalog, and Eratosthenes of Cyrene, who calculated the circumference of the Earth within a few hundred kilometers of accuracy. Between 270 and 275 AD, the city of Alexandria saw a Ptolemaic invasion and an imperial counterattack that completely destroyed the library. The Serapeum, which was the daughter library, was vandalized and demolished in 391 AD under a decree issued by Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria, and with that, all of the knowledge that was in this library was lost forever. Researchers have tried valiantly to recover what could have existed in this vast library of knowledge, but the unknown looms over all of us. In 7th place, we have the sunken city of Dvorka. Until roughly 50 years ago, it was simply a legend, nothing more. A marine scientist discovered the remnants of the underwater civilization near the coast of Dvorka, the city that's still on land that is, in the 1970s. And in 2002, scientists discovered an extremely advanced civilization from the past, lying untouched just beneath the ocean's surface. Thanks to carbon testing, it was established that the city is anywhere between 7,000 to 9,500 years old and stretches out 7 to 8 kilometers long and about 3 to 4 kilometers in width. The most fascinating, or creepy thing about this underwater city, depending on your point of view, is that all the human remains are still intact. During the 2002 excavation of Dvorka, many mud vessels, temple bells, ancient ritualistic vessels, and other artifacts were found, with the carbon dating indicating that they date back to roughly 7200 BC, otherwise known as the prehistoric period. At the time of this research, scientists also found a massive man-made wall that's almost 2,000 feet tall that has since been unearthed during periods of low tide and can somewhat be easily seen now. It'll be fascinating to see if we ever learn about how the city was built, or scientifically what led to the submerging and historical loss of the location outside of mythology. In 6th place, we have the death of Sir Harry Oakes. As someone who grew up visiting one of his former homes, now the Museum of Northern History, I knew I couldn't leave him off my list. Sir Harry earned his fortune fortune in Canada and moved to the Bahamas in the 1930s for tax evasion purposes. He arrived in Kirkland Lake in northeastern Ontario, Canada on June 19th of 1911, and in September of that same year, he registered the transfer of claim T1663, purchased from George Miniker, and established Lakeshore Mine. 20 years later, the gold mine was the most productive in the Western Hemisphere, and it ultimately proved to be the second largest gold mine in the Americas. It's no longer in operation, but plenty of other gold mines around the Kirkland Lake area are. On the evening of July 8th of 1943, while living in the Bahamas, shortly after midnight, Harry had his life brutally ended. He was struck 4 times behind the left ear with a miner's handpick to disguise the wounds from a silver ice pick, and was then burned all over his body using insecticide, with the flames being concentrated around the eyes. And here's where it gets really weird. His body was then sprinkled with feathers from a mattress. When he was discovered, the feathers were still being gently blown over his body by the bedroom fan. The Bahamas governor, the Duke of Windsor, who had become a close friend of Harry's during the previous 3 years, took charge of the investigation from the get-go, inviting 2 American policemen he knew from Miami to take over the case instead of the locals. The 2 American policemen had forgotten their fingerprint kits in Miami, but conveniently, the local Bahamas police force had fingerprint kits available in Nassau. By evening time on the second day of the investigation, 36 hours after his body had been discovered, they had arrested his son-in-law, Count Alfred de Marigny. Count Alfred was on bad terms with Harry, due to his playboy manners and lack of a meaningful career, and the fact that he had been married twice before for short periods to a wealthy woman, and that he had not asked Harry's permission to marry his daughter Nancy. Alfred was acquitted in a trial that lasted several weeks after the detectives were suspected of fabricating evidence against him. The chief piece of evidence was a fingerprint of his, which one of the officers claimed had been found on a Chinese screen in Oakes' bedroom where the body had been found. It was later discovered that the print had been lifted from the water glass that Alfred had used during his questioning by the Miami police captains. So, who killed Sir Harry Oakes? The theories that have emerged since 1943 have ranged from a killer reappearing from Oakes' Canadian past, to a rage-filled secret lover, to a hitman sent by mobster Meyer Lansky. Make of that what you will. There's a lot of really fun books out there about it. In 5th place, we have the mysterious Roanoke Colony. In 1587, 121 colonists led by John White arrived on Roanoke Island in what would be present-day North Carolina to establish a colony. As tensions mounted with the local population, John White opted to return to England to gather reinforcements and supplies. But when he returned several years later, the settlement was completely deserted, with no signs of a struggle and no remains to be found anywhere. The settlement became known as the Lost Colony, and none of its members were ever seen again. In 4th place, time to talk about Jimmy Hoffa. Known for his involvement in organized crime, Jimmy disappeared in Oakland County, Michigan on July 30th of 1975 and was declared legally dead in 1982. The identity of his killer, or killers, and the location of his body are ongoing mysteries. Police and forensic anthropologists have searched a number of sites in Detroit and Oakland County to no avail. Most recently, on October 25th and 26th of 2021, FBI agents visited a former landfill in New Jersey to conduct a site survey, following a deathbed confession by a landfill worker claiming that people had trusted him and his father with burying Hoffa's body in a steel barrel under the dump in 1975. The agents apparently didn't find this steel barrel. The identity of his killer is also unclear. Before his death in 2006, Richard the Iceman Kuklinski, a hitman, claimed to have ended Jimmy and dumped his body in a scrapyard, but a number of police officers have casted their doubt on the confession. As the years go by, it appears increasingly unlikely that Hoffa's remains or his actual killer will ever be found. In 3rd place, we have the missing tomb of Cleopatra. If you're unaware of her legacy, Cleopatra was queen of Egypt from 51 to 30 BC and its last active ruler. When she realized her kingdom was about to be no longer, she refused to become a Roman prisoner and ended her own life. Popular belief is that she allowed an asp or Egyptian cobra to bite and poison her. Now, no venomous snake was found with her body, but she did have tiny puncture wounds on her arm that could have been caused by a needle. After her passing, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire, marking the end of the last Hellenistic state in the Mediterranean. Unlike other famous monarchs from that time period, attempts to find her tomb, where she is buried next to her beloved Antony, have never been successful. Excavations carried out by Kathleen Martinez have yielded 10 mummies and 27 tombs of Egyptian nobles, as well as coins bearing images of Cleopatra and carvings showing her and her lover in an embrace. So far though, the tomb itself remains elusive, but temple excavations continue, with additional sites below the surface identified using ground-penetrating radar since around 2011. In second place, we have the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. She was an American aviation pioneer, being the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. She set many other records and was one of the first aviators to promote commercial air travel, wrote best-selling books about her flying experiences, along with being instrumental in the formation of the 99s, an organization for female pilots. On July 2nd of 1937, Amelia Earhart flew towards Howland Island, one of the last stops on her attempt to be the first woman to fly around the world. Nearing the tiny Pacific island, she radioed the Itasca, a United States Coast Guard cutter anchored off of Howland's coast, to ask it to guide her onto land with radio signals, saying, "We must be on you but cannot see you, gas is running low, been unable to reach you by radio, we're flying at 1,000 feet. Earhart's last confirmed message indicated that she was flying on a northwest to southeast navigational line that bisected the island, but she did not indicate in which direction she was heading. After that communication at 8:43 a.m., several expeditions since have tried to locate the plane's wreckage, but have had zero luck. By studying Amelia's final radio transmissions and calculating what is known about the plane's fuel supply, researchers have narrowed their search to a 630 square mile area of the ocean. Theories about what happened have ranged in extremes, from simply crashing and sinking, to being captured and held as a war prisoner, living as castaways that were never found, that it was a government cover-up, or she simply restarted her life in anonymity. Feel free to post your favorite theory in the comments. I'd love to know. And in first place, we have Jack the Ripper. What? I thought I'd end today on an easy note, something we can all fall asleep to. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer active in and around the Whitechapel district of London, England in the autumn of 1888. Attacks from Jack the Ripper typically involved female ladies of the night who lived and worked in the slums of the East End of London. Their throats were cut prior to abdominal mutilations, and the removal of internal organs from at least 3 of the victims led to speculation that their killer had some sort of anatomical or surgical knowledge. Rumors that the deaths were connected intensified in September and October of 1888, and numerous letters were received by media outlets and Scotland Yard from individuals claiming to be the Ripper. The From Hell letter, received by George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, came with half a preserved human kidney, allegedly taken from one of the victims. Extensive newspaper coverage bestowed widespread and enduring international notoriety on the Ripper, and the legend solidified. The concentration of killings around weekends and public holidays, and within a short distance of each other, has indicated to many that the Ripper was in regular employment and lived locally. Others have vehemently stated that the killer was an educated upper-class man, possibly a doctor or an aristocrat, who ventured into Whitechapel from a more well-to-do area. The killings were never solved, and the legends surrounding these crimes became a combination of historical research, folklore, and pseudo-history, capturing public imagination until this day.
Number 10. Construction. We can't talk about ancient Egypt and the mysteries still unsolved there if we don't start on how the hell these things were built. And also, it's not just like 3 pyramids. There's 118 of these things. When did they have time to construct all of these? Ropes? Pulley systems? Yeah, I'm not convinced. Ramps? Ramps. Ramps would have been a mile long against the pyramid's height. That's like hundreds of years right there. You ever dug a hole in your backyard? 2 feet. It's like 6 hours right there. And a sore back. Some have theorized a water hydraulic system was used to transport the carved rocks up slopes and tubes with tidal power. Okay, better. But like, how did they line up the rocks so perfectly and so square at the top? 1 inch off and every carpenter knows that's gonna shift everything. Also, the alignment to true north, the odd coincidences with the dimensions resembling the cosmos, they couldn't have known back then, you know? Buckle up, it's only gonna get weirder. Number 9, Chamber of Secrets. In 2017, scientists were able to peek inside the Great Pyramid finally using modern day physics. Particles, actually. What they found revealed numerous hidden secret chambers and rooms that were thought to never exist. The most bizarre discoveries was a massive unknown void nearly 100 feet long that lays just above the pyramid's grand gallery. Khufu, also known as the Great Pyramid, was received the most attention due to its size and age, but it wasn't the only chamber they found. Now, gold, mummies, manuscripts, ancient technology, what lies inside these voids? Also, how the hell did they floor and roof a room that's inaccessible? How do you build that inside such a small chamber already? Muon tomography uses cosmic rays of muons and generates a 3D image through nearly any material. This technology is groundbreaking, literally. Yep, found it, there it is. Number 8. The Saqqara Temple. The Pyramid of Djoser, also known as the Step Pyramid, is an archaeological site in the Saqqara necropolis. The discovery of a 4,400-year-old tomb, now seen as UNESCO's World Heritage Site, is the 6th tier four-sided structure, which very well may be the earliest colossal stone structure in Egypt, and possibly the world. Stone mounds were made in Europe for millennia, but it was the pyramid shape that started here. It was built 27th century BC during the 3rd dynasty for the pharaoh Djoser. The pyramid is the center of a huge complex and an enormous courtyard surrounded by ceremonial structures and decorations. Its architect was created from the Egyptian architect himself, Imhotep, the high priest of the god Ra. This guy was like the building manager, you know? The head architect. In fact, wasn't even found or really even studied till about the 1920s, and was recently excavated in 2018. The pyramid went through several revisions over the years, and in March 2020, the pyramid was officially reopened for visitors after a 14-year fix-up. Check out Netflix, they do a great documentary on this. Number 7. Queen Nefertiti, the queen of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, the beloved royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten. Nefertiti and her husband were known for a religious revolution in which they worshipped solely the sun disk Aten as their one and only god. Oh! Blasphemy! She reigned during what was arguably the wealthiest and most lavish period of ancient Egypt. Here's the weird part. We don't know where she is. Usually kings and queens are buried in very spiritual, very high-ranked places like the royal tomb. Easy to find. But nope, no one can find her, or even know what happened to her. In 2015, archaeologists thought, with high-resolution scans, voids that are behind the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb proposed maybe that she was there. Nope, no Nefertiti. In 2003, archaeologists thought through the hair DNA, Nefertiti's mummy may have been, quote, the younger lady. Nope. Turns out it was just Tutankhamun's mom. So what exactly happened to this famously revered queen? Who knows? Aliens, dude. When in doubt, always aliens. You know what I mean? Number 6. King Tut's death. When archaeologists opened a sarcophagus in Egypt's Valley of the Kings for the first time in 1923, it was the discovery of a lifetime. The ancient Egyptian boy king, King Tutankhamun, the burial chamber of the 19-year-old who ruled 3,300 years ago. But why did he die so young? DNA tests and CT scans show he suffered from malaria, a broken leg, and congenital deformities associated with inbreeding, common amongst royalty. Ouch. Because of his tomb's extremely small size, historians think King Tut's death must have been unexpected, and his burial rushed by A, who succeeded him as a pharaoh. The tomb's chambers were packed to the brim with more than 5,000 artifacts including furniture, chariots, clothes, weapons, and 130 of the king's walking sticks. A 24-pound solid gold mask was placed over him, and he was laid in a series of containers, 3 golden coffins, and a granite sarcophagus. His death still has scientists scratching their heads. Also, look up how many archaeologists died months after the cursed tomb had been raided. Yeah, you don't want to know. Number 5. The Lost Labyrinth. Archaeologists uncovered what's believed to be the remains of a long-lost labyrinth below the sand of the Pyramid of Hawara, known as, quote, the Labyrinth. Built by Amenhotep III, it was the most visited sites of the ancient world. Greek Herodotus claimed to have counted 3,000 rooms in the pyramid's funeral complex during the 5th century BC. According to them, the underground temple consists of over 3,000 rooms filled with remarkable hieroglyphics and paintings. Close, too, located less than 100 kilometers from Cairo. In 2008, with the aid of ground-penetrating technology, a Belgian-Egyptian expedition was able to confirm the presence of an enormous underground temple. With no visible remains, the story was thought to be a legend passed down until Egyptologists uncovered its foundations in the 1800s. The results of this expedition indicate the presence of grid-like structures deep beneath the sand. Please tell me there's no minotaur just running around down there. Okay. Number 4. The Mystery Queen. Archaeologists have unearthed a tomb of a previously unknown queen believed to have been the wife of Pharaoh Nefertiti, who ruled 4,500 years ago. The tomb was discovered in Abu Sur, an old kingdom necropolis southwest of Cairo, where there are several pyramids dedicated to the pharaohs of the 5th dynasty. The name of his wife had not been known until recently. She was Khenti-Khos, renowned as the mother of 2 Egyptian pharaohs. Khenti-Khos I is a mysterious woman who ruled in the 4th dynasty and has archaeologists puzzled at her burial complex in Giza. Though rough evidence for ancient Egyptian queens, the remains of this female leader were undisturbed for 2 millennia within the necropolis until its excavation in the late 1930s. Hieroglyphic inscriptions concerning her title had been discovered and subsequently became open for interpretation. Her title was initially regarded to be, quote, King of Upper and Lower Egypt and, quote, Mother of King of Upper and Lower Egypt. So who was this mysterious, powerful figure in ancient Egypt? Who was she? Number 3. The Dendora Lights. All these tombs and underground chambers, how the hell did they see anything under there? Well, we really don't know, but we have some sort of direction. These ancient battery-looking light bulbish things could have maybe been the power source. Ancient Egypt seems to be full of keyholes, drill holes, and shafts that are literally impossible without high-powered tools. Most people say aliens, me included, but I also say the Dendora light bulbs. They've been theorized as being some sort of battery. The Hoffa temple at Dendora contains several relief depictions Harsamtus in the form of a snake emerging from a lotus flower. The Dendora light is a variation of this motive, showing Harsamtus in an oval container, a snake inside taking a number of humans to lift, and it holds apparent meanings of the start of creation. Look, I don't care what you say, this thing is a light bulb. It's got a filament. And coils? Come on, drill holes? They couldn't have just lit fires underground? The smoke? The heat? I don't think so. Now a couple of DeWalt's. Just sanding up the pyramids real nice, you know? Who knows? Who knows? Number 2. The City of Punt. The land of Punt, or the ancient city of Punt, was an ancient kingdom sometime back then. A trading partner of ancient Egypt. It was known for producing and exporting gold, aromatic resins, precious stones, black wood, ivory, you name it. The region is known from ancient Egyptian records of trade expeditions. At time, Punt is referred to as the land of God. No pressure, archaeologists. The exact location of Punt is debated and unknown by historians. Cue Indiana Jones movie. Various locations have been offered: southeast of Egypt, a Red Sea coastal region, Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan. No one really knows. First deciphered in Egyptian hieroglyphics in 1822, scholars began reading Egyptian texts and the mystery got mysterier. That's not a word. More questions arose as to where Punt was located and what happened to it. The land of Punt is written by voyagers as being praised for its lavish riches and goodness of land. Okay, so it exists somewhere. This is awesome, isn't it? Wouldn't it suck if we already found everything? We're going on an expedition, boy. Grab your things, let's go. And coming in at the number 1 spot, the Sphinx. Where do I even start? Known as the oldest carved rock like ever, its age is debated literally every day due to the questions it asks scholars. Was it wind erosion? Water erosion? How many times was this thing broken and rebuilt? The Great Sphinx of Giza, the limestone statue of a reclining sphinx, a mythical creature with a head of a human and the body of a lion. Facing directly west to east, it stands on the Giza Plateau on the west bank of the Nile. The face of the Sphinx appears to represent the pharaoh Khafra, although this is heavily debated as wrong gears and looking nothing like him. It's since been restored with tons of layers of limestone blocks. Although still unfixed, its nose was broken off for unknown reasons between the 3rd and 10th century. Maybe some artillery fire over the years, who knows. The Sphinx is the oldest known sculpture in Egypt, and archaeologists suggest that it was created in the Old Kingdom using unknown construction methods. Yeah, definitely that battery thing. From 1817 to 1930, this thing was buried up to its neck and written and drawn about for centuries. I wonder what other secrets lay under her right now. I guess we'll eventually find out someday.
Number 10. Dimalov Pass. In February of 1959, 9 skiing and hiking buddies in the mountains of Russia became 9 mysteriously dead buddies in the mountains of Russia. When the group who set up camp on a slope never returned back home, people were sent out to search. The first thing they found on February 26th was their camp. An abandoned tent ripped open from the inside. Footprints all around, some barefooted, some with just socks, some wearing only one shoe, led directly to the woods nearby. That is where the first 2 of 9 were found, both wearing just their underwear with no shoes. The other 7 people were found over the course of the next few months. At first, hypothermia was the suspected cause, but over time, that made less and less sense. See, one body had evidence of blunt force trauma, another had 3rd-degree burns. One had been vomiting blood, one was missing a tongue, and some of their clothing was found to be radioactive. There's just so much going on here and no one knows what happened. All we have are theories. What do you think? Number 9. Ghost Ship. In November 1872, the British-American ship, the Mary Celeste, set sail from New York headed for Genoa, Italy. The ship was crewed by Captain Benjamin Briggs and 7 crew members, including Briggs's wife and their daughter. Supplies on board could last for up to about 6 months, and they had some pretty good stuff on board too, including a sewing machine and an upright piano. So it was really strange in December of 1872 when the Mary Celeste was found adrift in the Atlantic Ocean with no one on board, all its supplies still all accounted for, and it was completely seaworthy. The only thing missing was one lifeboat. The last entry on the logs had nothing about it that was unusual, and everything was in ship shape inside the ship too. The big problem is that Captain Briggs, his wife and daughter, and the 5 crew members were all never seen again. Now, we can say pirates, mutiny, or even sea monsters. Some scientists even theorize an explosion that left no evidence happened, and I don't know how that makes any sense. It is truly a spooky mystery though. Number 8. D.B. Cooper. On November 24th, 1971, Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. He was described by those who were there as a man in his mid-40s wearing a dark suit, black tie, and a mother-of-pearl tie clip, and a neatly pressed white collared shirt. He sat down, lit a cigarette, and ordered a bourbon and soda. Shortly after takeoff, he handed a note to a 23-year-old flight attendant who ignored it, assuming it was just Dan's phone number. I would have just hit him with the classic, I have a boyfriend? But alas, she ignored it, which Dan responded to by saying, "Miss, you better take a look at that note. I have a bomb." Cooper took the note back after the flight attendant read it, but his demands were for $200,000 in negotiable American currency, which is about $1 million today, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane on arrival. The plane landed, Dan let the other passengers and 2 flight attendants leave, and then he asked the plane be flown towards Mexico with a stop in Nevada to refuel. When the plane finally landed in Reno, Dan Cooper was nowhere in sight. The money was never used that we know of, the parachute was never found, and Cooper disappeared into mystery. Number 7. Area 51. This Nevada military base is the epicenter of an undeniably huge amount of speculation and mystery. Even the idea that this base existed at all wasn't confirmed until 2013, and only because the CIA had to respond to the Freedom of Information Act. People theorize about aliens and UFOs, time travel, teleportation, weather control, the Illuminati, and the list goes on and on and on. Evidence tells us that the base may be for the testing and development of weapons, which I'm sure is true to some degree. Alien weapons! Google Maps doesn't show us anything, obviously. People who do actually visit there aboard the unmarked jet named Janet don't see much because the windows are shrouded on the way down. And even when the internet tried to raid Area 51 not too long ago, no one actually did it because, well, it's the US military. I mean, knock yourself out if you think that's worth it. It's not. That's all the information I can give you because that's literally all the information I could find. There's nothing else. Number 6. The Voynich Manuscript. You know, to me, the drawings in the Voynich Manuscript kind of look like little doodles I make in my notebooks when I should be being productive. Maybe not the one that seems to be pregnant women though. I definitely would never draw that. And I definitely never wrote like that. The Voynich Manuscript is named after Wilfrid Voynich, who was a Polish collector and bookseller in 1912 when he acquired the 250-page manuscript. It's from around the 15th century and is written in this really cool looking code or some kind of language nobody seems to know, with strange drawings, a lot of which seem to be plants, but plants that don't really resemble any known species on this earth. As far as we know, the very first owner of this book was an alchemist from Prague named George Barisic. But even he discovered it just taking up space uselessly in his library, and he had no idea what it said or what it was about either. Some people think Voynich just made it up, but then how do you explain the carbon dating all the way back to the 1400s? It's one of those things we just still can't explain, like everything else on this list, obviously. Number 5. Mystery Epidemic. During a time where we are all a little bit more conscious of possible sickness and epidemics, why not include one from way back in the time of Henry VIII? You see, in 1528, Henry VIII was so terrified of this disease that he would move around to different beds to sleep in every single night. It was a sweating sickness that apparently swept through Europe 5 times beginning in 1485. The epidemics hit England, Germany, and other European countries, but the origins of the sickness and even the identity of the disease are still kind of unknown. But it sounds pretty terrifying to say the least. You'd start off with a sudden sense of dread, which I mean I get all the time, then be hit with headaches, neck pains, weakness, and a cold sweat over your entire body. Fever, heart palpitations, and dehydration after that, and then within anywhere between 3 to 18 hours, 30 to 50% of people would bite the dust. Weirder still, it popped up randomly in almost random locations, always after extended rainfall or flooding, and usually in the very rich or the very poor, so all of us middle class people are okay. This was definitely a weird one, for sure. Number 4. Flannan Isles Lighthouse. Have you ever seen The Lighthouse with Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson? Well, if you haven't, and you don't mind being utterly confused and a little terrified for a whole hour and 50 minutes, then I suggest you watch it. But in the meantime, let's talk about another mysterious lighthouse-related story. In the year 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers, Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur at the Flannan Isles Lighthouse off Scotland's west coast disappeared completely. On December 26th of that year, a 4th man, whose job was to relieve one of the men so they could go home, discovered the lighthouse completely empty, with the only other odd thing being an overturned chair. Some people think drowning, some people think they were taken by spies, and of course, there are the sea monsters and Cthulhu theories. Maybe we should ask Willem Dafoe. You might know, he seems pretty messed up. Number 3. Hey there, big guy. From one Scotland-based mystery to another. Everyone loves a monster mystery. We've heard of Bigfoot, we've heard of our underwater ally Nessie, but what I hadn't heard of until making this list was the Big Grey Man, who is native to the summit and passes of the second highest mountain in Scotland. He has been seen by a few eyewitnesses and has no kind of resemblance to a bear, meaning, unlike Bigfoot, it's unlikely that this dude is a mistaken animal. Instead of a hairy dude or a sea monster, the Big Grey Man is described as more than 10 feet tall, human-like, with short hair, broad shoulders, and long arms. Every report says the gravel would crunch beneath his feet. Psychologists have proposed that the few who have supposedly seen and heard the Big Grey Man have been in a state of physical and mental anguish brought on by exhaustion and or isolation. But that's a pretty specific and strange thing to see. Maybe it's a troll, who can say? Can you? Number 2. Roanoke. John White was the leader of a group of people who in 1587 founded a colony on Roanoke Island on the outer banks of North Carolina. John left for 3 years to get more supplies, and when he came back, he found that every member of the colony was gone, with all the buildings and fortifications dismantled. The only real clue to where they could be or could have gone was the word Croatoan, which was carved into a post. Croatoan was the name of a British allied Native American tribe, which White took to mean that this is where the colonists went, to the Croatoan island. But they hadn't. Some claims say that the colony was attacked by the Powhatan tribe, but there's no evidence of this at all. There was a conflict between colonists and that tribe, but it seems to have been an earlier group of colonists. Some people also think that maybe the colonists integrated with the Croatoan tribe, or maybe other tribes, but there is no evidence of that either. Let me know if there's something I missed or if you have a theory, because I don't have any. Number 1. The pyramids. I think possibly one of the biggest historical mysteries we have yet to figure out revolves around one of the biggest historical landmarks from the ancient world. The pyramids. We have been able to uncover a lot of information surrounding and about the pyramids, but we obviously still don't know everything. And one of the major things we are still trying to figure out is how exactly they were even built in the first place. Over 2 million limestones and granite blocks were used to build the Great Pyramids of Giza. Each piece of masonry weighed about 2.5 tons. So how the hell did they move these giant blocks? Unfortunately, they didn't leave any direct written records of that. A wall painting though, dating back to 1900 BCE, shows a whole bunch of men pulling a large statue on a sled as one person stands at the front pouring water over sand. Honestly, that would be really cool if it were actually how it was done, and it honestly could have been. The dampness of the sand greatly reduced friction by up to as much as 50%, making it much more feasible to haul large amounts of weight. Problem is, we just don't know. There are other mysteries surrounding astronomy and telling time, but construction is probably the biggest one.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Gladiator blood. Okay, nice and thirsty this morning, so let's talk about gladiator blood so we can get nice and hydrated for this video. When Charlie Sheen started talking smack about drinking dragon blood, everybody looked at him like this guy was insane. But back then, back in ancient Roman days, if you boasted about drinking gladiator blood, that's great, you were on the right track. Something's working for you, pal. Keep it up. Ancient Romans believed that gladiators had the literal heart of a lion, and to be fair, they were in immaculate shape and they looked like lions with their glorious hair. I'm attracted to Romans, most of them. So the thought process here, being extremely superstitious, was that if you drank said gladiator blood, whatever disease you had would soon be cured. Yes, the strong heart of a lion blood. Yeah, if you have some epilepsy, Roman physicians would tell you to drink some blood, like you're a vampire. Yeah, here you go. Here you go, Edward. Enjoy. Hope you feel better. Number 9, you're in trouble. Recently we did a list on dark medical practices used in history, and in that list we mentioned briefly about how urine was used by ancient Romans to whiten their smile. Yeah, fresh breath, not guaranteed actually this time at all. It's really not, it's the opposite in fact. Well, to dive deeper into this gross, disgusting fact, ancient Romans also used urine to wash their clothes. Yep. That's so gross. I was like, I hope no one peeing on them. Here we go. After they were done washing up, they would mask the smell, or at least try to, with leaves. Yeah, they would use bay leaves. Yeah, they didn't use soap because, well, the amount of ammonia in urine did the trick, so there was no need at that point. Yeah. Lye was also used to clean clothes at this time, but it was too pricey. So plan B was to head down to the, washrooms, the old ancient laundromat. Same thing, really, they're pretty close. And then everybody would catch up while, stomping and urinating and cleaning out their clothes. It was a good time. Number 8, new hair, new me. As soon as I cut my hair, I'm not gonna lie, I felt great. There's less weight on the neck, I could be more free in my silly movements when I do these lists. Glowing up these days is easier than ever. The tutorials on YouTube as well, you can learn how to do your brows while hearing true crime. It's amazing what we have nowadays. The Romans, not that easy. They had to do a little more work back then. If you were an ancient Roman and you wanted to show off the new you to your ex, maybe you're at a vomitorium party and you see your ex maybe perhaps, how would you dye your hair? How would you get their attention? How do you show Romulus that blondes do in fact do it better, right? Romans would have to use goat fat and beechwood ashes to bring out those highlights, yeah. Maybe it's goat fat, maybe it's Maybelline, maybe it's disgusting. It's definitely disgusting. Again, like those crazy Roman parties, this was a symbol of status, right? If your hair didn't reek of goat fat, who are you? You're not on the list, honey. Goat fat or bust. I don't speak broke. See ya. Emperor Claudius, his third wife, Valeria, apparently she once dyed her hair blonde and painted her entire body gold, and then had a contest to see who could hook up with the most Romans in one night. Yeah, Bachelor in Paradise, Pompeii edition. Tune in, tonight at 8. Number 7, party hard. The term boot and rally was added to the Urban Dictionary back in 2002, pretty recent. But Romans, they were doing that a long time ago. They were riding that wave out a long time ago. They were ahead of the game. They knew how to get down. All those ancient parties, well, rather, they knew how to get it back up. Ancient Romans would often make themselves throw up in order to continue eating and drinking because it was a social status. Yeah, what would normally be a red flag at a house party was a sign of respect back then. But it was business. These parties were literally business meetings. These long, exhausting banquets, attending these was a sign of social standing. So you wanted to be around the longest. You wanted to drink the most. You wanted to dance the most. And you wanted to, ideally, puke the most. Those are the coolest Romans in town, right? You ever see a Roman gagging? He's getting some stuff done in the city. He's like, oh, excuse me. The solution back then was to throw it up and then continue. So you can, excuse yourself from dinner, go to the vomitorium, right across from the dining room. How convenient. Must be a nice breeze rolling through there, I'm sure. But then you would go to this room, grab a feather, and then tickle, thy throat, and then make room for even more lobster. Yeah, they have a thing that holds feathers. So you just go in and go, oh, a blue one. And then you shove it down your mouth, and then put it back in. After you dry it off first, you gotta put it back in. Number 6, bathroom hangouts. Bathroom lighting is key when you go out, okay? Those 1 a.m. selfies have to look good. That's the whole point, or else why are we going out? Why am I putting on shoes, right? The curls aren't working, I'm not going outside, that's it. In ancient Roman times, hanging out in the bathroom with your friends was common. They didn't have any neon lights or anything cool. They didn't have Arctic monkeys playing or any cool atmospheres. It was just a lot of bricks. And also, it of course smelled really bad. They didn't have the Charmin Ultra less is more lifestyle either. They had to use sticks with sponges to wipe. And yeah, they also, same with the feathers, they had to share said sticks. Socializing in these ancient toilets was like socializing at a Starbucks. It was normal, it was business, you would spend hours here and you got stuff done. Groups of Romans would discuss business, politics, military strategies, you name it. All the while there's a dude in the corner just taking a shit. Romans believed the goddess Glaucina was the guardian of the toilet drain system. Glauca Maxima translates to big drain. So when you invent the flushing toilet, yeah, you're like, this is some higher power. You can call your toilets whatever you want, Just maybe don't call any more meetings there because it smells a little bad. Number 5, no soap. Look, sometimes you're in a rush, you don't have time to shower, so you do the classic Axe body spray X, The old 1-2. Do you remember that, Chris? Oh, yeah. It was so cold too on the armpits. Yeah, like, no wonder I can't grow armpit hair. I've been spraying like aerosol, I've been spraying spray paint on my armpits every morning since I was like 9. I still use it sometimes. Axe chocolate, no contest, so good. Ancient Romans, they were way ahead of the game. They didn't clean their clothes with laundry detergent like I mentioned earlier. It's not shocking to hear that they also didn't use soap to wash their bodies. No, instead, they rubbed perfume oil all over themselves to get rid of sweat and all that jazz. But later on, once said oil had dried up, they then removed it with a wooden wedge or spatula, a tool called a strigil, and they just peel it off. I kind of like that idea. Whenever I burn in the summer, I'm like, ooh, let me peel this neck slowly. It's the world's most painful loofah, essentially. Dirt and sweat would get stuck to this oil and then subsequently peeled off. So it worked, but it took a little more time than our showers nowadays. For Romans who were well off, this of course was a whole event. There were several, assistants. You could pick all these fancy fragrant oils. It was slow and sensual. It was like fun, dare I say. How is anybody ever on time? Like, oh, sorry, I was late. Those oil baths had to stick around for 4 hours this morning and get peeled. It's crazy. Number 4, Roman art. This one reminds me of Superbad a lot, and you'll understand why. Back in the 18th century, when excavations took place in the city of Pompeii, they found lots and lots of art, all with a similar theme. Everything looked like a certain body part. An eggplant-ish theme. There were carvings in the streets, there were carvings of these things in the walls, under a street sign, you name it. They're just everywhere. Just rich history carved in all over. We're still finding these today. They're called the phalluses of Pompeii. Yeah, imagine tripping over one of these. Then you do that thing where you look back to see what you almost rolled your ankle on. You look back and see that, you're like, oh, what? Some dude in Pompeii got you like thousands of years ago. Just chiseling out a... Many tour guides like to say that they all point and lead to a brothel, when in reality, that's a lie. These were all just for good luck. These symbols were to ward off the evil eye. Most folks kept these outside the front of their homes, right next to the mailbox. Coming with mail, you're like... Number 3, animals in the Colosseum. In order to spice up the classic fight and clash swords till someone's not alive anymore, sometimes gladiators would be put in the arena with an animal instead of another human being to, spice it up, just to spice up those Saturday night shows, I guess. People are crazy. Were they squirrels? Or were they tigers, elephants, bears, leopards, lions, hyenas, or wolves? The latter. It was all the scary big animals. Animals were very expensive, so they weren't used every day, but the organizers of these battles would go all out for the fights that did include them. Everyone would pile in. It's kind of like Logan Paul versus Mayweather, these big social events where like, well, what else are we doing, let's go watch. Most animals that were used in these great battles unfortunately didn't make it out alive. That's the horrible part. I'm a big animal lover, so that's hard to read. This led to other important factors down the road. People loved when animals were included, that eventually trade in exotic animals took place. That's where it all started. This quickly took the hippo from the Nile, for example, and then made them extinct. That's how they did that. Cut to today, thousands of species are going extinct more and more. Let's just bring gladiators back. Let's just do it. UFC, put them in armor. Let's see what happens. That'd be hilarious. Release all the animals from zoos and then bring back just gladiators. Life will be fixed. Number 2, naval battles. Have you ever heard about staged naval battles in the Colosseum? It's a weird spectacle, but it wouldn't have been that crazy. It sounds a lot bigger and more lavish than it really was. The Colosseum was flooded at this point, which I'm sure took a hot minute, and then these ships would come out, and then it would be like medieval times almost, but with a splash zone. A really dirty splash zone. These ships were designed to resemble vessels from famous battles before, but the bottom of the ship was flat, right? These were fake boats, obviously. The water was only 5 feet deep, so obviously they couldn't use, real ships or anything like that. It was all show. It wasn't always violent reenactments either though, as funny as that sounds when you think of the Roman Colosseum. Sometimes they would fill the Colosseum and have nude, synchronized swimmers as a show. Imagine that, imagine traveling the land and then you get there, you're like, oh, let's watch some action, and it's just like ballet, and they're like, oh, this is actually quite nice, I like this a lot. Yeah, also goggles weren't invented until the 14th century, so they had to swim underwater like, ugh, this is so gross, their poor eyes. These naval stories were doing so well that Emperor Domitian devoted an entire lake to them now. Like the Goblet of Fire, people would walk to a lake to watch these insane shows. Only once the shows moved over there permanently, they then used the Colosseum's old floodgates to hide those animals in. So it was, we love upgrades, I guess. It sucks, it's all bad. And finally, number 1, audience troubles. Okay, what's it like watching these ancient Colosseum shows? Was it fun? Was it horrifying to watch? Were you... like, the PTSD from these shows alone. When the Colosseum was built in 80 AD, about 50 to 80,000 fans of Roman combat would pour in often. The energy is high. This was their only entertainment. They weren't watching The Witcher Season 3, you know what I mean? Some fans would get so into the action that they of course would heckle, like we do nowadays with like UFC. People would be watching like, oh, throw the right hook, throw this thing. They would obviously do the same. But in Roman Colosseum days, you didn't get a warning if you heckled, you know what I mean? One of Rome's more violent emperors, Domitian, who I mentioned earlier, he was pretty diehard about the Colosseum and their games. So much so that one day, a guy in the crowd was heckling a gladiator so much, he was probably, talking smack about his oiled up abs or something like that. So Emperor Domitian had him pulled from the audience to the center of the arena. And then he had to fight to survive. He didn't get out alive, obviously. It was all bad. So yeah, don't huckle. Don't huckle? Don't huckle or heckle. Don't huckle or heckle or heckle. How terrifying is that? Can you imagine heckling and then getting called out? Ancient Colosseum times. Hey Maximus, smile. Me?
Number 10. We're making a video about mysteries from ancient Rome, and you think I'm not going to talk about Pompey's own Villa of Mysteries? You balking, mate, you balking! The Villa of Mysteries was discovered back in 1909 after being buried at Pompeii. One of the more mysterious finds was a wall fresco that depicts what could be a play or wedding, or maybe an initiation ceremony to an ancient Roman cult known as the Cult of Dionysus. We don't really know anything about what this cult actually did. They were obviously very good at keeping things under wraps. What happens in the cult stays in the cult. Or however that saying goes, I don't really remember. No one was allowed to know what happened in their initiation, rituals, or really anything. I mean, they weren't even allowed to write it down. But if that was the case, why was someone allowed to paint it on a wall? Make it make sense, bro. Make it make sense. Number 9. Family traits. I think this one is kind of really interesting. There is a village in western China where the people who all live here, meaning their families are all historically from here, have blue eyes and blonde hair. While not exactly uncommon, I guess, the sheer amount of people specifically from here that have these particular traits that are different from the black hair and dark eye color of most people in China suggests that everyone who is native to this area may actually be descended from an ancient Roman legion. I have the blood of a legionnaire flowing through these veins! That'd be so cool. In 53 BC, Marcus Crassus lost pretty badly in a fight in what is modern-day Afghanistan. It's believed that the Roman soldiers that survived traveled as mercenaries, just trying to make a few bucks, and they apparently wandered as far as this village in western China. DNA tests on the villagers of this area actually do show that they are 50% Caucasian, which is super interesting, but we don't know for sure if it was these traveling for sale legionnaires that were the cause. And maybe I'm just a silly goose, but I don't even know how we would be able to find that out with some kind of archaeological evidence. Number 8. Misleading. In 2010, we discovered a coffin in the city of Gabi. A coffin made of lead. It was also, interestingly enough, in the shape of a burrito, giving it the nickname Lead Burrito. You won't be seeing me going into Chipotle to ask for that one. Yes, I'll take one lead burrito, extra deceased Roman inside, please and thank you. No. The University of Michigan, the ones who led the expedition that found the coffin, said that lead coffins like this are extremely rare. But on top of that, this one specifically is incredibly heavy, like 1,000 pounds, letting us know exactly how expensive it must have been. The mysterious part comes to play when we realize we have absolutely no clue whatsoever who the adult man inside this coffin is. We know he was around at the time of Nero, but there is no evidence inside this burrito about the life this man lived. No extra toppings in this burrito, just lead and meat. Yum. Number 7. The 9th Legion. In ancient Rome, there was a legion that was known to be the best of the best the Romans had to offer. It was known as the 9th Legion. Being the best of the best came with being put into the harshest of areas to fix Rome's problems. So these boys in red were sent to England past Hadrian's Wall where they would fight against the Picts. But then, they were just never heard from again, ever. Now, the obvious answer here is that they got absolutely demolished by the Picts. The last thing we heard was from the year 108, and we know that the Legion had a pretty brutal surprise attack in Caledonia due to some Roman guards falling asleep on the job, which doesn't really seem like best of the best behavior now, does it? What makes this whole thing really weird is that in 121, there are some bricks that have the seal of the 9th Legion on them, which is about 13 years after their last mention. And on top of that, there is an officer from that legion who shows up as the governor of Arabia in 142. I think these could have just been survivors who were taken out of England after the best of the best went bust. But who knows? Not me. Number 6. Lacosta the Poisoner. Nero, 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 you little rascal you. Emperor Nero was known as one of the worst, and he was also known for having a few people, de-lifed. What better way to do that than with poison? The chemist Lacosta was the one who became his poison expert, but she's also kind of unfairly known as the world's first serial de-lifer because of that. Kind of unfairly because it could be completely true. We just have no idea. We know from historians at the time that Nero and even his mother liked Lacosta so much that he actually helped set her up with a school dedicated to creating new poisons and all kinds of research surrounding poison. But we don't actually have any of that research. There is no proof of any of it. But she was executed by the guy who took on Nero's job after he was gone, and I can't help but think there is a decent reason for that. Maybe because of all the people she poisoned and helped poison? We will never know. Probably. I mean, we could. I don't know. Number 5. Play that lyre to the fire. While we're talking about Nero, he actually has a mystery all of his own. Nero was very famously a fan of music. He would often sing and play instruments, and he was also a fan of being utterly insane. Ending lives and forcing people to party all night, have massive parties, and eat until they puked. So when you hear a rumor that this crazy emperor may have caused the Great Fire of Rome that destroyed a lot of the city on July 18th in the year 64, you might believe it. And you might even believe the rumor that he also played the lyre while the city burned. It just kind of all checks out for how crazy he is, but obviously we have no evidence of that actually happening. Neither of those two rumors can be proven, especially not now, 1,958 years later. What we do know is that the emperor did benefit quite a bit from the destruction the fire caused. It allowed him to change the aesthetics of the city, persecute thousands of Christians, and introduce new building codes. It also turns out Nero may have been 35 miles away in Antium, but I mean, prove it! You can't. I can't. Number 4. Ham Hill. Ham Hill in England is the location of an archaeological dig by the universities of Cambridge and Cardiff, where we made the crazy discovery of the graves of a lot of people, dating back to the time in history when Romans made their way into England. The part that is so alarming, other than finding a pile of corpses, is that these particular bodies had been stripped of their exterior layers and chopped up. It's gruesome. But oddly, most of the skeletons found here actually belonged to women, and most of which were women in their early 20s. But this wouldn't be a mystery if those were all the facts. We actually don't know what happened here. The obvious answer is some kind of mass life-ending escapade, but why, damn it, why? We don't know. Number 3. Hard Talker. Surprise! You've met the afterlife. Were you a good person? Well, if you weren't, if you were a threat to your community, say in ancient Rome, then it's pretty likely you would have been buried face down. So there, take that. Hold up, they cut out your tongue and put a stone in your mouth? What in the Gaius Octavius Caesarion? What is going on here? That's probably what the team who unearthed the grave of a man from a Northamptonshire site dating back to Roman Britain probably said. They found a man who was buried face down in his grave, missing his tongue with a stone in its place. Pretty odd. Infection in the bones of his jaw show it was removed while he was still alive. And the practice of replacing a missing body part with another object was definitely known to happen in Roman Britain, although it was rather rare. The only thing is we have absolutely no idea what this man had done. Maybe he just really talked too much. Maybe he lost his tongue to something completely unrelated to his delifing, and this stone was just to replace it. We don't actually know, and there is no evidence to tell us. Theories? Number 2. Skulls of London. I'm not really sure how this happens, how it was discovered, or anything, but in 1988, 39 skulls were excavated really close to the Museum of London in London. Those 39 skulls were alarming enough, but the 39 soon expanded into hundreds of skulls. Now, possible theories included that the skulls belonged to executed criminals, gladiators, or even soldiers that had done the Monty Python, run away! Most of the skulls seem to have been from men, and most indicated that they suffered rather brutal offings. Some people think the skulls were dumped in display pits. Some people think they were placed there purposely. To make matters worse, not too far away we also discovered what seems to be an ancient Roman cooking pot with bits of humans in it. All of this creepy stuff was found in an area no bigger than a swimming pool, which makes it very obvious that it was all a part of the same thing, possibly part of some crazy Roman cult. Maybe it's all just a big coincidence. We don't have the evidence to know. I don't think I could really tell you exactly what in the name of Mark Antony went on here, but I do know that it were not good. Number 1. Mole warfare. Who would have thought chemical warfare would make for a great story? Especially 2,000-year-old ancient chemical warfare. Back in the Roman city of Dura Europus in Syria, a siege took place between the Roman and the Persian forces. During said battle, the Persians dug siege tunnels underneath the walls of the Roman city. The Romans knew and built their own tunnels to cut them off. Problem with tunnels like that is you have absolutely no idea of where exactly the opposing team is going to show up. The Romans ended up building their tunnel higher than the Persians did, so you got like this kind of situation going on. Now, archaeological digs have discovered about 19 Roman soldiers in these tunnels. But it seems that these soldiers were not stabbed to cause their demise, but instead, they seem to have suffocated. Well, how the heck did that happen? According to archaeologist Simon James, he believes that the Persians actually allowed the Romans to dig into their tunnel, and then use the elevated position with a sort of chimney effect to set a mix of bitumen and sulfur on fire and let the fumes do the deed. But, and say it with me, there is absolutely no evidence of this. Yes, good, you've caught on. Very nice.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Their formation. The pyramids of Giza, as fascinating as they are to look at from the ground, have an even deeper meaning from above. Located in northern Egypt on a plateau just west of the Nile lies perhaps the most fascinating structure created by humans. The northern pyramid, the oldest one as well as the largest, was built for the king Khufu. He was the second king of the 4th dynasty. This one, like I said, is the biggest pyramid, so when we imagine the pyramids together, this is what we have in our brains, the big, massive Goliath right there. Little white tip at the top. The next pyramid was built for King Khafre, the 4th king of the 4th dynasty. The southern pyramid was for King Menkaure, the 5th king of the 4th dynasty, also the last pyramid to be built. Their connection to the cosmos really took flight back in 1995 in a book called The Orion Mystery. Robert Bauval pointed out the formation of the pyramids also just happened to align with the 3 stars of Orion's belt in the Orion constellation. This is the plot of Transformers 2, so yeah, people have really ran with this idea since then. There's nothing in Egyptian texts that have proven this at all in any way, shape, or form, but this list may change your mind. Cosmic coincidence? Perhaps. Number 9, dung beetles. Dung beetles, yeah, also known as scarabs, but also known as dung beetles, so we're gonna definitely call them dung beetles. They're the only species in the entire world that follows the Milky Way naturally. How weird is that? A lot of animals have these natural instincts, right? Some animals follow the sun, sea turtles instinctively sprint to the ocean the second they're born, you know, to avoid getting plucked by giant birds from the skies. They do it naturally. These beetles would naturally follow the line of the Milky Way, and then they would also roll their dung towards it. They would just, listen to what I just said, dung beetles instinctively follow the cosmos rolling their poop. They're just like, I must go back. We got a whole poop galaxy. So bum beetles are trying to phone home, apparently, I don't know. Symbols of these beetles are seen all over, either in hieroglyphics or near the sacred lake at the Temple of Karnak. There's a massive scarab monument, a poo-poo buggy monument, just right there. There's even a legend still to this day behind that statue that if you walk around it 9 times, you would find health, wealth, and love. You would just become a white girl's Instagram if you walked around it 9 times. The scarab is there to represent the god Khafre, which at the time Egyptians believed was the sun, but it was also known as the scarab-faced god. I grew up thinking the sun was a baby, but I just watched too much Teletubbies, that's probably why. Are these bugs just trying to go home to their bug alien poop master? Why does there need to be so much poop? Where are they going? Why are they in a rush? Whatever DIY project is going on that planet, just leave me out of it. Number 8, King Tut's dagger. Only a few years after King Tut's tomb was discovered in the Valley of the Kings, archaeologist Howard Carter found a dagger that was buried with the king. Now, it's important to note that it's not uncommon to be buried with your belongings. That's why these tombs were built in a certain way, these big, massive, monumental ways. So grave robbers, any Nicolas Cage guy caught snooping around with a torch, they'd get trapped, ideally. They can't just steal King Tut's dagger, right? Even if you have the declaration of yada yada. No, you can't go in there and monologue your way to this treasure. This one dagger is quite the mystery though. With recent advancements in technology, we're able to use a technique called portable X-ray fluorescent spectrometry, which is a mouthful, a lot of air just left my body. But according to the Journal of Meteorites and Planetary Science, King Tut's dagger is actually made of iron, nickel, and cobalt, suggesting this material came from meteorite. So when people say the pyramids were made by aliens, it's laughable obviously, but evidence like this just fuels that fire. I don't know, do you believe now that I said that? Number 7, the Black Tomb. Back in 2018, remains were found by archaeologists. They found this massive black granite sarcophagus in Alexandria. It hadn't been touched in over 2,000 years, so we decided to open it. We opened it and we found 3 skeletons. And we also found this brown, reddish sewage water. It was horrible. Skeletons and sewage water, just a bad combo. You know, they were half expecting gold or some sorts, but no, not this time. They opened it up 2 inches only and the smell was so foul, everybody just ran away. Egypt's Ministry of Antiques Committee just ran away. They needed gas masks to go back. What a red flag that is. 9 feet long and 5 feet wide. It's just pretty much just a big granite bathtub full of bones at that point. There were also 3 inscriptions. That's the mystery part. There were these drawings on these small sheets of gold. One resembled a seed pod of an opium poppy inside a shrine of some sorts. The other is a snake, an unhooded snake, usually connected to the goddess Isis, the same god that Cleopatra embodied, but we'll talk about that more later on. The last one is a palm branch or corn or something like that. Experts believe it's related to themes of fertility and rebirth. Or some guy just like corn, one of the 2 options. I vote the first, but you never know. Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, said in response to locals freaking out that we've opened it and thank God the world has not fallen into darkness. I was the first to put my whole head inside the sarcophagus and here I stand before you. I am fine. Whew, nice. Only that was back in 2018 and a few things have happened since, so did we really make it unsheathed? I don't know. Unsheathed, is that a word? Number 6, 2020 mummies. Yeah, as if 2020 wasn't stressful enough, we also found more mummies. I'm glad Brendan Fraser is returning to Hollywood because it sounds like we're gonna need him pretty soon. This is alarming. While we were stuck inside watching Netflix and chilling, more than 100 sealed coffins were found in Egypt. The findings date back to 712 BC, which was a period where Egypt was controlled by foreign civilizations, like Persians and the Greeks. These coffins were still occupied and untouched for that long. The discovery has taught us that the Saqqara was pretty much the main burial site of the 26th dynasty, including the first known burial pyramid. That entire piece of land honestly is so intriguing and just interesting. I want to know what's hiding in Egypt, at the same time, I don't. You know what I mean? Number 5, sun god origins. One of the most interesting facts about all this and everything with the queens and the kings of Egypt is the impact that they had on religion. Both Queen Nefertiti and King Akhenaten were in a cult, believe it or not, the cult of the sun god Aten. Now, in the earliest accounts of the queen, she assisted her husband in a ritual that smited the female enemies of Egypt at the time, and there have been a few blocks that have since been recovered from the Theban tombs of the royal butler that depicts the queen wearing her unique blue crown, so definitely her, part of these sun god rituals. So now cut to the end of the king's ruling, the Aten was now Egypt's main god, and the queen, Queen Nefertiti, was a stepmother of King Tut, so her daughter was married to King Tut, so there's a handful of Egyptologists that believe that right before King Tut's ruling in the 14th century, there was a small window where Nefertiti ruled as a pharaoh. There's also a great deal of historians that believe that Nefertiti was a co-ruler to her husband, King Akhenaten, but we just don't have enough evidence quite yet. The reason we're adamant on finding everything we can is because she literally changed Egyptian religion. Kind of important. Number 4, Queen Nefertiti's death. After reconstructing Egypt's religious and political structure, soaring to new heights as a woman in the Egyptian court, the queen just vanished. Out of the blue, all of a sudden, just like that. During the 12th year of the 17 that her husband ruled for, historical records seem to have just wiped off the face of the planet. Her whole legacy just gone. She was gone from everything. Many believe she didn't actually die in this case, but rather she disguised herself and continued to rule. She's the man, the whole world. The next in line after Akhenaten's reign was Pharaoh Smenkhare. So is that really Nefertiti in disguise? Perhaps. I sure hope so. That'd be pretty sweet if we prove that. The reason we believe that she may have disguised herself as a man is because of the female pharaoh, Hatshepsut. She ruled with a fake beard in the 15th century. Gotta fool your followers. This is a while back. Lastly, there's a theory that the reason Nefertiti was banished was because she couldn't produce a male heir. We've gotten closer to uncovering the truth back in 2015, when Nicholas Reeves and Mamdouh El-Damadi found what they thought was a hidden doorway in King Tut's tomb that contained the sarcophagus of the Queen. Number 3, KB55. Located in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, Tomb 55, otherwise known as KB55, was found by Edward Ayrton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb, and the reason we call this tomb by a number rather than by a name is because we really don't know who was inside. Even the walls of the tomb inside, they aren't covered with any hieroglyphs to tip us off. It's just bare for the most part. The only hint as to who is buried remains on these walls. There's one hieroglyph that remains. That hieroglyph was discovered in 1907, and it translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." That's creepy, okay. Even these massive stones were built in order to prevent anything from getting out of the tomb. Yeah, usually with these ancient tombs, it's the opposite. You can't have grave robbers come in. This one, you can't have anything get out. Must have been pretty bad. The description for those inside the tomb had also been destroyed, so we have literally no idea who was in there, or what. Many believe it's Akhenaten, and back then, they didn't believe in multiple gods, just one, so Akhenaten may have gotten off on the wrong foot with the high priests, and over his 17 years of ruling, he was convincing everybody that their art and religion was wrong, and the only god in existence was the sun god. His own son, King Tut, succeeded him and luckily restored the previous religion, but an empty tomb? I feel like we're missing something here. A major part of the story, I feel like it's just, slide that in, and then we'll figure it out. Number 2, King Teti. The Pyramid of Teti was built for the first ruler of the 6th dynasty. While it's not as flashy or as massive as the other pyramids, inside it contains the oldest writing in the religious world, the pyramid texts. These texts go back to 2400 BC. Those are some old texts, it's like some BBM type texts, that's how old we're talking here. These pyramid texts were specifically written so that this King Teti could ascend to the heavens after his death. There are also spells and incantations meant to free the king's soul and arrive in the cosmos afterwards. More specifically, for Teti to become a star in the sky and join Osiris and Orion in the God Squad. There's even instructions on how to preserve the body and travel to said heavens. Maybe the pyramids are in fact a gateway to the cosmos. Maybe those beetles were onto something. And finally, number 1, Lord Nefertiti. For this next mystery, we'll be looking at the land down under. We're looking at Australia. Yeah, it connects to Egypt. You'll see. Egyptian hieroglyphs educate us on our past, right? There's still so much we don't know, but it's fun to speculate. It's fun to find UFO-looking objects hiding in them or like helicopters. That's part of the fun, to speculate and wonder, because we really don't know anything. We don't even know what's in our ocean, let alone what happened thousands of years ago. So when Egyptian texts appear around the world in the middle of nowhere, Australia, those UFO hieroglyphs get a bit more concerning, right? Like the Gosford glyphs, for example. They were discovered in 1970s at Karyong, and there's about 300 engravings spread over 2 sandstone walls. Those hieroglyphs are strikingly similar to that of Egypt's. There's birds, even the markings of a scarab, those Milky Way, bugs. Egyptologist Raymond Johnson believes that this is the burial site of Egyptian royal family member Lord Nefertiti, who met his fate around 2600 BC, with some tales telling the story of 2 prince brothers who came from Egypt and subsequently became shipwrecked. But other panels get into the extraterrestrial goodies. Of course, that always does. Some of the Gosford glyphs have UFO shapes, but most of them are just scarabs, birds, and sun symbols that popped up as well in Egypt. But how can they possibly be connected that far away that long ago? That's the mystery. Kicking off the list at number 10, secret archives. Okay, we'll start this list off with some secret archive myths that kind of kicks off everything that happens. The archives are 53 miles long. There's around 35,000 volumes of catalog, and the Vatican's secret archives are no joke. It sounds like some national treasure stuff, but really there's a lot to this. They're very real, but in order to see them for yourself, it's gonna have to take some time. The indexes aren't public, hence why I'm kicking this mysterious list off about them. Only scholars can access it after they're 75 years old, that's usually how it went. Their official purpose is to house the Holy See's official paperwork. And of course, it's a treasure trove of everything and anything related to the Pope. It's also full of ancient documents, because where else do you safely store a letter from Mary, Queen of Scots? Yeah, Mary was killed after serving roughly 20 years in custody, but eventually she was sentenced to death for conspiring to kill Queen Elizabeth I. Now, before she met her fate, she wrote a letter to the Pope, literally begging for her life, but of course, as we now know in history and life, the Pope did not intervene, and on February 8th, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots was executed. Number 9, Vatican Tour. Things changed for the better come 2010. Those secret archives weren't so secret anymore. Dan Brown's bestseller, Angels and Demons, increased interest of the archives. We wanted to look into more secrets, and also National Treasure kind of helped. Weirdly enough, National Treasure comes up a lot on this list. It's a theme. People like this. Also video games too. People love this Vatican stuff. So for the first time ever, the Vatican allowed journalists to tour it. This was 10 years ago. Now, the Secret Archives actually put out some of those important documents. This whole event was also celebrating its 400th birthday, so it was a big step in history, of course. But later on in 2019, Pope Francis announced that the Vatican would open its archives officially. This was the 80th anniversary of Pius XII's election to the papacy, and the archives would have been open for all of those months. And out of all the times to be open, it had to be opened in March 2020. Francis said the church is not afraid of history, and on March 2nd, 2020, they were finally opened. The church may not be afraid of history, but pandemics, that's a different story. The archives were closed shortly after due to COVID-19 restrictions that same month. It's almost like it wasn't meant to happen. Interesting. Number 8, exorcise. The Catholic Church authorizes the use of exorcism to those who are deemed possessed. Yeah, not just low-budget horror movies. Real life, this is what we're talking about. Exorcisms depend on a few things. Authorization from the church, of course, is important, and the faith of the exorcist. The actual exorcism at hand is when the church asks publicly and authoritatively that one individual becomes protected against the power of evil, and they're withdrawn from their dominion. Yeah, you don't see those very often, thankfully, because that would be pretty jarring. The Catholic Church revised the rite of exorcism come 1999, but traditional rite of exorcism in Latin is still an option. So if you get possessed, sorry to tell you, it's slim pickings at this point. If you've seen a horror movie, any horror movie, these are not pleasant experiences. The demon possesses their physical body, it holds control over them, and that's when an ordained priest with permission of the local bishop, of course, comes to save the day. And in order to do so, you need to exclude the possibility of mental illness. It's gotta be legit. The late Pope John Paul II performed 3 exorcisms in his life, and Father Gabriel Amorth, the chief exorcist at the church, claims to have expelled more than 300 demons a year from the Vatican offices. That's like some Ghostbusters stuff. It's a lot of hours. They must be busy. Number 7, mafia ties. In The Godfather Part 3, spoiler alert, but there's a deal between the mafia and the Vatican, and it leads into the Pope getting taken out. It's a pretty heavy plot. I watched it when I was younger, no idea why, didn't really understand at the time, but could this be a reality? Could the mafia and the Vatican be up to no good behind closed doors? Back in 1978, September 29th, Pope John Paul I was found dead. Vatican officials declared the 65-year-old Pope's death. His cause was from a heart attack, but the fact that he was only in office for 33 days has people like us scratching our heads. We have to ask a few questions. A couple of murderinos out there are like, what happened? It's a little fishy. There's never an autopsy done at the time, and at that time, the Vatican had ties with organized crime. Because back in 1982, only 4 years later, Vatican bank president Father Paul Marcinkus resigned from his post after numerous scandals exposed bank ties with the mafia. So the bank had to pay out more than $200 million to creditors. This was real life, not The Godfather. Marcinkus, though, he was involved in a few mysterious deaths, even Pope John Paul I, but he retired and went to Arizona in 1990, and then he later passed away in 2006. A lot of connections here that were never really fleshed out. Number 6, dead man on trial. This comes from 897 AD, and I can't believe this actually happened. It's one of those things you read about and you're like, people actually did this, like physically with their hands? Okay, interesting. The Catholic Church back in 897 AD once put a man on trial who wasn't even alive anymore. Yeah, it's a little gross. Now, it's one thing to uncover more crimes or details that somebody has done after they pass away, that's normal, but to actually bring the body of the person to court, like Weekend at Bernie's style, like physically bring them up the stairs, that's... Really? The Catholic Church held a trial for Pope Formosus, who was accused of usurping the papacy. So his body, dead body, may I remind you, was exhumed, dressed in the appropriate attire for court, can't believe there is one at this point for a dead body, then brought to court for judgment. Also, you must be wondering right now, how long were they dead for? 1 day, 2 days, was it a week? Was it 2 weeks? 7 months. Guy was dead for 7 months, and they're like, well, just about time for that court, let's do it. Dig him up. Of course, a deacon was appointed to speak on the Pope's behalf because, like I just said, dead for 7 months, but he was found guilty and his body was then stripped, again, of the garments, so now they dressed him in rags, and his 3 fingers of benediction were cut off, and then he was then thrown into the river Tiber, that same river that Romans would dispose criminals into. So they undressed a dead guy to then formally dress him again, put him in different clothes, and then once found guilty, undress him, put him in different clothes, and then tossed into a river. I don't want to say it's a waste of time, maybe just a waste of arm strength. I don't know, bring your own nose plug. This is a really gross one. Number 5, time machine. Okay, I have to throw this one on this list because this is a real theory. People actually believe there's a time machine hidden somewhere in the archives. It sounds to me like someone's playing a bit too much Assassin's Creed, but again, that's me, and I'm doing the list, so let's talk about it. The machine itself is believed to have been built by Father Pellegrino Maria Ernetti, an Italian priest and, of course, as you guessed, scientist. It's called the chronovisor, but it's not really a time machine per se. It's kind of like that thing from Harry Potter where you drop a tear in, you put your face in, then you can see the future and past and all that jazz. It's one of those. Maybe we've already discovered it, but this damn time traveler keeps preventing us from getting in there. The more I talk about this, the more I'm convincing myself. This isn't good. Let's move on. Let's move on forward in time throughout the list. Number 4, the third secret. When it comes to hidden documents in the archives, the only thing more intriguing than time travel is perhaps the third secret of Fatima. It all began in 1917 when 3 children from Portugal received prophecies. They were visited from the Virgin Mary 6 times in a short amount of time. The apparition is now known as the Lady of Fatima. The Virgin Mary told them 3 secrets. The first secret was a vision of the underworld, of hell. That was revealed July 13th, 1917. The second secret was a statement about World War I ending, as well as a prediction of another war during the reign of Pope Pius XI, should Russia not convert and should men continue offending God. The third secret, Lucia chose not to disclose in her memoir in 1943. It was written down later on and delivered to Rome finally in 1957. The third secret was about the 20th century prosecution of Christians that came together in the failed murder of Pope John Paul II. That attempt was on May 13th, 1981. Which was the 64th anniversary of the first prophecy. But many believe the third secret is still unknown and that that's all just hogwash. The answers apparently lie in the Vatican. So far, many people believe the third secret has something to do with nuclear wars and natural disasters, but honestly, no spoilers. Let's just be surprised, you know? Number 3, late night text messages. Turns out the Pope liked to text people. I'm not sure if Angry Birds was on the homepage, but realistically, it probably was. Texting was definitely on the agenda, this we know. Pope Benedict XVI would send texts out to his homilies, and come 2009, the Vatican started a YouTube channel. I felt it was only right to include this tidbit of information on a top 10 Vatican list, because when else could you talk about this? I'm like, smash that holy like button, gang, let's do it. It seems fitting, I don't know. The actual channel features addresses and ceremonies, all that good stuff. Really, it's a great way to use technology. But when the Vatican dropped an iPhone app, that's how you know that we're definitely in the future. The app contained, of course, the breviary prayer book and prayers of daily masses, but like now you can adjust the font. You know what I mean? Like this is the future. We can adjust the brightness on holy books. Never did I ever think this was a possibility. Somebody tell Jesus this is happening. This is huge. Number 2, hidden proof. We've been looking for the Lord for a while now. You might see his face on a slice of toast if you're lucky. That's definitely a possibility. But conspiracy theorists believe that the archives could tell us more about St. Paul and Emperor Nero, meaning that we could find out more about Jesus, the big man himself, and if his existence was, 1, real, but also this could show us his biological descendants. How cool would that be? A great amount of people believe the Vatican is hiding proof that Jesus didn't exist. That's a popular conspiracy theory here. This would of course discredit the church, so if there's ever a place to hide said truth, the center of the whole operation is probably a safe bet. And finally, number 1, the Illuminati. They've been talked about for years. The amount of artists rumored to be part of this Illuminati program, conspiracy thing, it's insane. That's an easy rabbit hole to fall down if you're on Reddit. Be careful there. But also, Beyonce and Jay-Z, for sure Illuminati. Confirmed. Yes, many people believe that the archives are also controlled by the Illuminati. And it's a specific type of Illuminati as well. It's not the same group that runs the music industry or anything like that. It stems from after its medieval dissolution. The Illuminati, over time, elected members to enter the big offices, including that of the Vatican City. So the OG showrunners of the Vatican are the Illuminati, apparently. I mean, great, we love ending on the craziest conspiracy theory ever. That's not bad. Believe it or not, there's actually people who think that there's aliens being stored in the secret archives as well, but I don't want to spend an entire point trying to convince you because, you know, can't spoil all the secrets.
At number 10, Jack the Ripper. For all my true crime buffs out there, this one is for you because we're talking about one of the most famous unsolved cases ever, and that is the one of serial killer Jack the Ripper. Even nearly 130 years after the killing spree that took place in London's East End in the late 1880s, no one knows who the person responsible for all this bloodshed was. There have been countless theories over the years as to who Jack the Ripper could be, but no concrete answers have been given. Judging by the fact that back in the days of Jack the Ripper, the technology we used to solve crimes like this was pretty much non-existent, it's not surprising that these crimes remain unsolved. The identity of Jack the Ripper is one of the most heavily disputed historical mysteries of all time. As it stands, the most widely accepted suspect was a man named Aaron Kaminsky, who was a barber who moved to London from Poland. DNA evidence collected in recent years suggests that this could be the man responsible, and that combined with the fact that Aaron was connected to other killings, being known as Leather Apron or the Whitechapel Murderer, makes this a good guess, but again, we may never truly know for sure. At number 9, the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin has been highly debated by both scholars and some religious people. The shroud is said to have covered Jesus' body after the crucifixion, and when you look closely at the staining on the cloth, it shows a faint image of a man's face and torso believed to be Jesus himself. And the more research and testing people do, the more muddled things get, making it even harder to find a definitive answer to whether or not this is really Jesus' face in the cloth. The search for the shroud's authenticity has been ongoing for decades, and there's no definitive answer of whether or not it's real. Carbon dating has suggested that the cloth is less than 800 years old, meaning that it may have come from sometime in the Middle Ages. But a study done back in 2014 suggested that perhaps an ancient earthquake that affected Jerusalem may have created an ionic image in the shroud, as well as, quote, altered the radiocarbon levels that later suggested the shroud was a medieval forgery, end quote. Right now there are more questions to be answered than ever before, so it may be a while before this mystery is solved. Now before we continue talking about some of the mysteries throughout history that remain unsolved, why not take a moment to leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this one. At number 8, Amelia Earhart. Another one of the most famous unsolved mysteries from history is what the heck happened to Amelia Earhart? I'm sure you guys have no doubt heard of the famed pilot who tried to fly across the globe but was never seen again. In 1937, Amelia departed on her journey to circumnavigate the globe, but after receiving an emergency message from her, people got worried, especially when communication stopped entirely. The search for Amelia began just an hour after her last recorded message, but to this day, Amelia nor her remains were ever found. In 1940, a woman's body was located on Gardner Island, part of the Phoenix Islands, Kiribati in the western Pacific Ocean. Along with it looked to be a campfire, shoes, and navigational equipment. The woman looked to be around Amelia's height, but the identity of the body was never truly confirmed to have been Amelia. Searches have continued to be led in hopes of finding some trace of the pilot and what may have happened to her, but so far we have nothing. There were rumors of a woman seen alive around the 1930s, so some believe that she may have just lived as a castaway, but once again, we don't know for sure. At number 7, Mothman? Now let's get into an urban legend that some believe could be true, though remains a mystery to us all. The legend of the Mothman has inspired many things in pop culture, such as the 2002 film The Mothman Prophecies. The original story of the Mothman comes from a dark November night in 1966, where a group of teenagers claimed that they had seen a beast with bright red glowing eyes. According to the Mothman's first witnesses, they watched as the creature launched himself into the air, unfolded its wings like a bat, and started chasing them until they were eventually able to get away. It may sound ridiculous, but many times legend is based on something real that we just can't comprehend. So if the Mothman itself isn't real, then what is it? We may never know. At number 6, the Titanic. Everyone knows about the Titanic, right? It was the unsinkable ship that went against its namesake and ended up at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. This historic tragedy has been talked about for many years and has been a staple in pop culture for a long time as well. The most well-known case of this is the 1997 film Titanic that portrayed a dramatized story of the sinking of the ship. Now you're probably wondering, well, it's not a mystery. We all know that it just hit an iceberg and it sank. But there's a lot more mystery to that than you'd think. Turns out that the ship's collision could have been avoided with a pair of binoculars. There was a pair of binoculars locked inside on the ship's crow nest, and the keys were kept by Second Officer David Blair. Unfortunately though, Blair was replaced in the last-minute crew shuffle before the ship set sail, and Blair kept the key with him, and therefore the crew couldn't unlock the box with the binoculars and weren't able to see the iceberg in time. Though this mystery remains kind of solved, there's still a number of conspiracy theories concerning the Titanic that you can always deep dive into. At number 5, Salem witch trials. Witchcraft, man. It's crazy. Can't trust them witches. Or can you? The Salem witch trials of 1692 remain a misconception to many, as over the years the stories and facts became muddled and confused, so let's set the record straight and solve this mystery. Though many of us have been told that the common method of killing someone who was found guilty of witchcraft was being burnt at the stake, it turns out that this is all just a myth. Burning at the stake wasn't actually ever used, and instead hanging was the preferred method for witch execution. On top of this misconception as to how these so-called witches met their end, there's another mystery, this being what really was this so-called witchcraft. It is believed that what people thought to be witchcraft might have actually been an infection of ergot poisoning. Eating ergot-infected rye may have caused vomiting, hallucinations, and a crawling sensation under the skin, which may have been the bewitchment that people back then were witnessing. At number 4, the Solway Spaceman. Space, the final frontier, and one of the places that holds the most mysteries, aside from our world's oceans, that is. There is so much that remains a mystery to us when it comes to space, like the mystery of the Solway Spaceman. On May 23, 1964, a man and his wife were out one afternoon taking pictures of their daughter. When the film was developed, they saw pictures of their kid, but there was something else a little mysterious in the background. An image of what looked to be a man in a white spacesuit. This rose a lot of red flags, as you can imagine, and so the photograph was reported to the police. No one was able to explain what was up with the astronaut in the background of the photo, and no one was ever able to learn the identity of whoever was floating around. To this day, this image remains one of the most perplexing photographs in history, just adding to yet another unsolved historical phenomenon. At number 3, Adelaide Bartlett. Now I think this next one could possibly be considered to be a true crime story, but I guess you guys can be the judge of that. Up next to the plate, we have the unsolved mystery of Adelaide Bartlett and the supposedly impossible killing of her husband. In 1886, a woman named Adelaide Bartlett stood trial accused of killing her husband. It was believed that Adelaide took her husband's life by making him ingest chloroform, but she ended up being found not guilty by the jury because no one could figure out how the poison was administered to her husband. When chloroform is ingested, it would cause intense vomiting, and it would have left traces in the esophagus as well, so people would have been able to determine how this killed the victim. However, because these clues were never found in the case of Adelaide's husband, nothing really came of it, and the crime became an unsolved mystery. Many years later, it was theorized that perhaps Adelaide mixed the poison in with brandy, which would have made it possible to swallow the poison without leaving a trace. But so far, that's just the best theory that we have, and we haven't been able to solve the mystery. At number 2, Dr. Crippen. Moving on to another pretty wild true crime case that went unsolved is the case of Dr. Crippen. Back in 1910, Dr. Crippen became one of Britain's most infamous murderers after the body of his wife Cora was found in the basement of the couple's home. Punishment was pretty swift in this case, and the doctor was arrested, tried, found guilty, and ultimately executed. For years, this just remained a closed case, but in 2007, DNA testing blew the doors off this case when it was discovered that not only was the body that was found in the basement not Crippen's wife Cora, but it was actually the body of a man. Evidence later showed that Dr. Crippen was innocent and that he was wrongfully executed. Now the question remains, what really happened back then? But we may never get the answers that we need. And finally, at number 1, the devil's footprints. Nothing says spooky mystery quite like the devil, right? This next unsolved mystery dates all the way back to the morning of February 9th, 1855, where people in towns all across southern Devon awoke to find a trail of hoof-like marks in a single line in the snow. Witnesses described these markings saying that it looked like it had been branded into the snow with a hot iron. It was reported that these strange marks were found over a distance of 40 miles, with one source describing it as, quote, some strange and mysterious animal endowed with the power of ubiquity and created them during the night, end quote. To this day, these bizarre markings were never explained, though some had theories ranging from escaped kangaroos to badgers and even mice. Others believed that the hoof marks were the work of the devil himself. Still, this remains a mystery, as it was said that, quote, no known animal could have traversed this extent of country in one night, neither does any known animal walk in a line of single footsteps, not even a man, end quote.